Young, pretty sweet Georgia, now an old sweet peach, was raised in the high country, where the biggest news in town wasn't politics or money, but who was getting married, who had just gotten married, and who was sneaking around with somebody else's husband or wife. Moonshine, better known as corn liquor or just plain corn, flowed like water. Georgia had spent her childhood peeking through cracked doors, watching a room full of deep-voiced Southern men and sassy, sharp-tongued card players pass around their tin cups and lay their money down. Her mama, Betty Ann, had the sharpest eyes in the county, but Georgia thought she was fast, too fast to be caught spying. She wasn't. Betty Ann saw her every time, but never said a word. Georgia would scamper back to her room, open up her Bible, and start flipping through the pages as if the good Lord himself could erase what she had just seen. Because no matter what, Sunday morning meant she'd be sitting in the first pew, bright and early, with her mama and siblings. Church was the law. You went, or you got a lashing, then went anyway. In Georgia's family, Jesus Christ was bigger than any man, stronger than any Superman, and no one came before Mama's Jesus. Not even Georgia's daddy. 45 years later, Georgia still sat in that first pew, but now she did so in style. Her red bottom heels barely made a sound on the polished floors. The black Balenciaga gown fit her like it had been stitched by the Lord's own hands. When she removed her black Chanel rectangle sunglasses and let her eyes settle on the pulpit, a hush fell over the congregation. "Good morning, Pastor," she said, her voice smooth as molasses, before taking her seat. Speculation had been flying through Reclamation Ministries like wildfire. Some said Georgia and the pastor had a little something going on behind the First Lady's back. Others swore they had seen her sneaking into his office after service, leaving hours later with a smile that said more than just prayers were exchanged. And this morning, the pastor, Reverend Harold James, looked uneasy. His hands gripped the pulpit a little too tight, and when he cleared his throat, his voice cracked just a little. His wife, First Lady Lorraine, sat up extra straight, her lips pressed so tight they could hold water. "Today's message," Pastor James began, "is about temptation." A few amens rang out, but the weight in the room was thick. "Temptation is the enemy's way of distracting us from God's plan," he continued. But his voice faltered when Georgia crossed her legs, slow and deliberate, her gown slipping just enough to reveal a shimmer of silk. The murmurs started. A few of the older deacons exchanged knowing looks. Sister Beatrice nudged her friend and whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Georgia, unbothered, opened her Bible and smiled. Pastor James loosened his tie. "The devil will disguise sin as something desirable, something." Georgia raised a perfectly arched brow. "Something meant to lead you astray," he finished, fumbling with his notes. First Lady Lorraine tilted her head, watching her husband like a hawk. Pastor James let out a slow breath. "But let me remind y'all, the Lord sees all. He sees what's done in the dark." The room was dead silent. All eyes were either on the pastor or Georgia. Georgia leaned forward, her voice just loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "That's right, Pastor. The Lord sees all." It wasn't a confession, but it sure wasn't a denial. The choir shifted uncomfortably. The organist coughed into his sleeve. And somewhere in the back of the church, Sister Beatrice fanned herself, whispering, "This gonna be a long service."